As some of you are aware, this is a very pro-Noncat account, and as there has been a lot of discourse in the comments in our past TikToks, I decided it would be helpful to address some frequently used anti-Noncat arguments that I see a lot. 1. It's warrior cats, not warrior blanks, like warrior dogs, foxes, etc. I'm not really sure who thought this would be a compelling argument, because first of all, the title is actually Warriors, not Warrior Cats. Warrior Cats is a fan-made name created to separate the series better from others, but it's not the actual title of the series. The title of the series is just Warriors. And for 2, even if it was Warrior Cats, the title doesn't justify anything. If a game was named Dogs Only, No Other Animals, but the rules said you can be animals other than dogs, what exactly do you think would win out? The rules are created to regulate the game. The title is just there to differentiate the game. It might be a bit silly to have a title that says that only includes a particular animal, but what the rules say goes, and the rules say that you can be animals other than cats. So, warriors, warrior cats, it is allowed. 2. It's unrealistic. There are several things wrong with this argument. For one, realism is a huge buzzword, and everyone has different standards for it. Regarding real life, it's kind of impossible to apply real-life logic to this game about talking cats and a stone that can communicate with their ancestors, and spirits who can actually come down and interact with the real world. And regarding realism in the series, well, the series realism is constantly changing. The Aarons have shown to have a complete lack of consistency when writing, and we have tons of things that we never could have imagined were possible years and years ago. So realism can't really be used either in the series or in real-life context to define someone else's OC. And even if realism was a defined term, it shouldn't matter if someone else's OC is unrealistic, because it's theirs, not yours. Just because you share a vicinity with them in a public domain does not mean you have some automatic right to tell them that their OC doesn't fit your standards and therefore doesn't belong in the roleplay. You do not own the roleplay. It is a public server, and they are trying to just exist. And there's really no rulebook that permits you to judge someone else's character. And while non-cat clanmates have never existed in the series, it's definitely hinted at to be possible. Like, for example, Midnight's entire arc, with a badger that could speak cat and fox and rabbit, and helped the clans repeatedly, and had a connection to Star Clan and could tell prophecies and omens. It's just really indicative of where the series could go with non-cats. There was also the rat leader who could speak cat in Firestar's quest, and Millie repeatedly speaking dog throughout the entire series, which proves that even if Midnight is some kind of spirit or apparition, mortal animals can definitely learn each other's languages one way or another. So it's not just restricted to some Star Clan tied animal, it can also just be totally mortal creatures. There was also Hollyleaf, who raised a fox pup briefly, and while the fox pup did become hostile and aggressive eventually, that was only after it was returned to its family of foxes. This kind of hints that nurture plays just as much a role as nature in the Warriors series, and that it's very possible that if Hollyleaf had chosen to keep that fox pup and raise it, it could have been friendly to cats. And it also proves that cats do have the capacity to care about non-cat creatures. They don't just mindlessly kill them thinking that they're threats. 3. It's disruptive to roleplay. This is textbook blame shifting. People existing as a certain OC, as long as they aren't making a scene, are not the ones being disruptive. It's the people who harass others for merely being in a game as a non-cat, those are the ones who are being disruptive to the roleplay. And often they tend to accuse the non-cat of being the ones who disrupt the roleplay by merely existing, just to shift the blame off of themselves. And if the non-cat OC is making a scene, then your problem is with disruptive roleplayers, not non-cats. Disruptive roleplayers can be both non-cats and cats. Just as there can be respectful non-cats who acknowledge and move on from a void, just as there are cat roleplayers who acknowledge voids and move on as well. So if this is your complaint, then your complaint only is really effective against disruptive roleplayers, and yeah, I hate those too, but they aren't tied to noncats inherently in any way. And plus, you don't have to roleplay with noncats if you don't prefer to. No one is trying to force you to roleplay with someone against your will. Just avoid them, server hop, or find a private server, because they're not the ones who should change characters just to match your preferences. You're the one who has to work with your preferences and find a suitable environment or a suitable way to work with your environment. You cannot ask someone else to adjust themselves to fit to you, because that's ultimately one of the most selfish things you can do on a public server. 4. It's power playing, and this is also related to the last one. This is kind of the same deal as the whole disruptive thing. It is not power playing to merely exist as a predator, nor is it power playing to be a strong prey warrior. The only issue arises if they try to use that power to attack someone without their permission, or attack someone who hasn't done anything to deserve it. As long as they don't unfairly exercise their power, then you cannot accuse them of power playing just by existing as something that is stronger than the average cat. If your issue is with noncats who excessively murder and attack, then, just like the last point, your issue is with power players, not noncats, because power players can exist both as noncats and cats, and respectful players can exist both as noncats and cats as well. And people are allowed to make their OCs as powerful as they want, because at the end of the day, if you don't like it, you can void it. There is nothing inherently power playing about merely existing with a lot of power. As long as you get permission to use that power, or you have a reasonable excuse to exercise that power, then there's nothing disruptive or power playing about using it. 5. Noncats are against the code. There are two very distinct things that are wrong with this assertion. For one, no they aren't. The code says nothing about noncats. Search up any resource right now online that explains the warrior code. You can see it says absolutely nothing about animals that aren't cats. The closest it comes to noncats is talking about trespassers, which can be both cats and noncats. And 2, even if noncats were magically against the warrior code, which they aren't, but in the make-believe scenario that they were, the series regularly breaks its own code with extreme frequency, and in plenty of cases, it's shown to be the right thing to do. There's no reason to suddenly insist that the code is an unbreakable law of the land when it comes to noncats, because then you'd be defying everything that the series says. So this argument just fails in all avenues. 6. We need to follow the lore. Well, I've already pointed out everything wrong with the lore while answering these other questions, so I won't ramble again, but to give you a brief recap, it's inconsistent, parts of it support noncats, and everyone differs over what parts of it are valid and what parts are not. So you can't really find a one-size-fits-all, because there's always going to be someone else who agrees to be against noncats, but then says, hey, but this specific part of the book I believe in and you need to follow it, and there's a chance you disagree. And second of all, just no, we do not need to follow the lore. Warriors is not some assortment of holy books with a distinct culture and traditions and rituals. It's just a fantasy series. The authors do not care how far you stray from the book's current lore. There's really no reason to assign such a high priority to sticking to the book's lore. What is forcing us to stick to the book's lore other than gatekeepers who just want to ruin other people's fun and make their preferences law? The lore is just an excuse. When people say follow the lore, they just mean follow my preferences disguised as parts of the lore. 7. If I need to server hop, why can't they? And while this isn't outright hatred of noncats, it does draw some false equivalences, and seeks to restrict noncats without outright banning them. First of all, just in case anyone actually thinks this, anti-noncats are not forced to server hop or told that they need to server hop. Noncats still sometimes server hop of their own accord. It's just that anti-noncats are told to server hop more often. And this is because of a fundamental difference between what noncats and anti-noncats stand for, respectively. The noncat OC is merely existing. They are not actively harming anyone just by being a noncat. Sure, if they start attacking or murdering someone without permission, then yeah, that's bad. That's disruptive, that's power playing, that's harassment, that's trolling, whatever you want to call it. But their base offense is not being a noncat. Meanwhile, the anti-noncat is a player who has a preference and is using that preference to exercise control over someone else's roleplay and character. It's not inherently bad to have a preference, and it's not inherently bad to try and chase what fulfills that preference. I don't think it's bad at all to not want to roleplay with noncats, as it's your choice and it's your life to fill. But it's when you start thinking that you have the authority to tell other players to change themselves to suit to your needs is when I tell you to stop. And that's why anti-noncats are often told to void or server hop or find a private server, because they are the ones who need to work with their preferences and realize that not everyone else's roleplay revolves around them. The noncat is merely existing, and the anti-noncat is bothered by someone else's existence. That's the difference, and that's why we tell anti-noncats to server hop if they're dissatisfied. 8. Noncats ruin the game. First of all, this is kind of a misrepresentation of what's actually going on. And to see why, all you need to ask yourself is, are noncats thinking that the game is ruined? Are people who are okay with roleplaying with noncats thinking that the game is ruined? Are people that are chill and just void noncats and move on, do they think the game is ruined? No. They just think it's a feature of the game that exists and that they will adjust to in their own way. The only people who have any problem with the rule are people who can't take the alternatives, the people who refuse to void, refuse to server hop, refuse to find a private server, and just assume that everything in the roleplay has to revolve around them. And if you refuse to take any alternatives, then I'm sorry, but that's on you. The public server, again, as I've said many times, is not there to fulfill your specific needs. It's there for everyone to roleplay the way they like. And if you refuse to try and curtail your roleplay experience to match the environment around you, and if you instead try to change that environment to suit you, then this game just won't work for you. That's why you think the game is ruined. But no, you're ruining your own roleplay experience. 9. The noncat community is toxic. I've never seen an argument shift more blame than this one. For one, yes, there are toxic parts to every community, and 99% of the time, just because it exists doesn't invalidate the community itself. And this argument is just trying to shift the focus off from anti-noncats over to noncats. And to see what I mean, just look at some screenshots of what anti-noncats do and say towards noncats. Reminder, please do harass noncat players. If they want to roleplay as a lion, dog, wolf, squirrel, whatever, they need to stay away from the clans. Slur, profanity, ass, die, profanity, you know who I am. Ugh, respond. Useless profanity. Give me a reason to not delete this account. Now. Speak, ass. Asshat, shit, noncat profanity. Profanity, noncat profanity. Furry, gay ass. Profanity, useless profanity. I'm deleting this account. Well, I'm not going to say that there aren't some screwed up parts of the noncat community. I haven't seen a lot, but there must be, as there is in every community. But right now, anti-noncats have both the power and the confidence to say this sort of stuff, and it usually goes under the rug. Anti-Noncats say this bullcrap and outwardly hate non-cats, and yet we're still trying to find a peaceful way to resolve things because we know that plenty aren't this way and are willing to coexist as long as we give good reasons. I'm reaching out to the anti-Noncats, who I know will listen, and in hopes that they will also realize just how fucked up some other anti-Noncats are. I know we can coexist. I want us to. But as long as stuff like this is still endorsed on the community, then there will not be a resolution to this conflict. Thank you for listening.